All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hey, Money. How you doing? All right, we're going to get started with the afternoon portion of the program. I have what I'll say is the privilege of presenting two people who have become friends of mine as I've been working together with them over time, because they are very like-minded, and we have similar values, and we see similar potential and passion in what brands can do. So we have coming up Mark DeSwan-Arons and Alana Gold from Effective Brands. And this is a company that Michelle and I on and off have been talking to for about two and a half years now, prior to when we were deliberately going global. And we always wanted to find a way to work with them because they add incredible value to global marketing organizations, but we weren't there yet. Then middle of last year, Michelle and I were in Shanghai with the Effective Brands team, and they presented on how to build a brand globally and best practices from across industries, something that was absolutely inspirational and frankly practical. You can apply it. And so Michelle and I looked at each other and we saw right away that there was obvious application to our business. Effective Brands, in my mind, is almost at the center of marketing globally. This company is connected to best of the best marketers across industry, and they work to help companies build their business and globalize their brands. So Mark is an acknowledged thought leader in the burgeoning area of global marketing leadership, and he is co-founder and chairman of Effective Brands. He co-founded the company in 2001 following a successful career with Unilever. He's been listed among the top 10 marketers for the last 3 years in TBM. And in 2008, he was awarded the Asian Global Marketing Award. At Effective Brands, Mark spearheads the leading global brand study, which is an ongoing learning project with contributions from over 250 brands and 2,500 marketers. And then Alana Gold, senior partner with Effective Brands, is based in the New York office, and she's an expert in international marketing capability development. Prior to joining Effective Brands as partner, she was senior marketing executive of PepsiCo, Novartis, and Yum Brands, where she became a specialist in global brand management and innovation across multiple categories and distribution channels. Having worked across all continents, Europe, Asia, Latin America, and the USA, Alana has a proven track record in helping companies define brand and innovation strategies, as well as improving marketing capability. And she prides herself on her ability to drive results across cultures by engaging and building multinational and cross-functional teams. So please give a warm welcome to Mark DeSwan-Arons and Alana Gold.
Do you know that feeling when you think somewhere there's somebody that doesn't like you? You're not quite sure who it is, but there's little signals. And you think, I need to find out. So that's how I feel at the moment. Because not only did they put us right behind the biggest marketer in the world, I think he got the World Marketing Award 5 times or something, Jim Stengel, thank you very much for that. But then to sort of heap on top of that, they did, well, now what's the best? Oh yeah, the siesta slot. Let's give them the siesta slot. So I'm not going to even apologize for the fact that you fall asleep, because it's probably both of us. Anyway, it's very, very special to be here. I'll apologize for my Dutch accent right up front, even though I was... yeah. And I already found a fellow Dutchman in the room. But actually, I was born in the US. And what's so special is I am, as Elana is, one of you in our background. We were global marketeers. We were marketing in organizations that were going global. And one day we said, do you know what, there's something here that we want to delve a little bit deeper in. And that's what we're here to share today. So we in no way want to present this as the gospel or as the must-do rules. What we're going to tell you are some of the things that we've noticed, that we've learned, and that we've now actually recognized as best practices as we look at other global brands. So very quickly about us. I said I was born in Berkeley, so I do have the US passport. But it's almost irrelevant because all my life I was in Amsterdam and in London. I studied in Rotterdam. But for the last 15 years, my wife and I actually moved in together in New York. So I now consider myself a New Yorker. My wife, however, doesn't. She considers me a citizen of the country called Boeing. And this is painfully true. Sometimes she says I moved to a village called Airbus, but it's not New York. We have offices in different places of the world, and I do get inspired by seeing different cultures, and this is the people that are most important in my life. Last January. Then Ilana, who will be talking as part of our presentation as well, is also very much a global citizen, Russian, also American, and has worked all over the world, has an incredible daughter, Sophia, and Ronnie, you see there, they're planning their next trip, which is China, which now actually they've done, because indeed that's where we met. So, what's new? Why are we talking? Well, if you think about it for a second, I think it's pretty true that today every marketer works for or competes against a global brand. And if you think about it, just 10 years ago, things were very, very different. There were organizations, I won't mention any names, that had domestic and rest of the world. Now, we have organizations that are competing at a global level. And I mentioned that we were marketers just like you. What we noticed as we ourselves were sort of confronted with that change, and it really is an accelerated pace, as you'll see in a few minutes, what we noticed was that there was a lot of people that, on top of just having to do a good marketing job, were now being challenged to work in a matrixed organization, to try and sort of take best practices from one place or give them to another place. And it was almost a second dimension to the job. And when you try and figure out, so what is that dimension? What does it take to win in global marketing? There is absolutely nothing, or at least there wasn't, to refer to. I know because I looked. So, about 10 years ago, we started a study. We called it the Leading Global Brands Study. And quite frankly, it was because we were excited about the prospect, but at the same time realistically understood that we didn't know a hell of a lot more than our own experiences. So we reached out to a couple of our friends, that were doing marketing in other places, the head of Heineken, the head of Dove, and said, hey, would you be willing to talk to us? And the value exchange will be, for 2 hours, be honest to us. We'll close the door, we'll never share your secrets, and tell us what's working well for you, but also tell us, what do you find challenging in this new global marketing environment? What do you wish you'd done on day one, or what do you wish you'd never done? And what we'll do is, we'll aggregate that, and when things start floating to the top, that makes sense, we'll share it back to you. Well, we knew we were onto something when at the end of year one, we didn't have 20 brands participating as we had hoped, but it was close to 50. People were calling us and saying, I'm the head of brand X, I'm challenged by this, will you come talk? And that's basically now snowballed into a study called the Leading Global Brand Study. We added a quant component a year later, and so now we never do anything before we do a quant project, and we have over 250 global brands that have participated, and 2,500 people like yourself, director and above, that are leaders of global brands, and 21,000 people that work on a global brand or are the colleague of a global brand manager, like R&D or sales. And so what we're going to be sharing with you is partly anecdotal. Actually, quite a lot of it is very robust, backed up by this research. We finally got around to actually writing that book that we mentioned that we couldn't buy last year, and it was indeed a great pleasure. We did a big conference. We had CMOs flying in from basically the top 50 companies in the world to talk about global brands in China, and we did it at the World Expo in Shanghai. It was a very exciting event, and both Michelle and Eric were there indeed, which was very special. So I'm going to quickly take you through what we've learned in this study, looking for what does it take to win in global marketing. And then Ilana is going to take you through some of the characteristics of the brands themselves. So which are the ones that seem to float to the top, and what is it about them that makes them special, that makes them win? But then right on top of that, we're going to say, and how are they led? What does it take by all of us to work on global brands? How do we work together? How do we do things? How do we talk to each other? How do we create a common language? How do we learn from each other so that we're not pretending to be 82 different countries, but we're actually leveraging the scale and scope of our operations? So we'll be looking at the what and the how, and then we'll bring it together, both with a little case study from, is Jim back yet? The world that used to fight with Jim, Unilever, another detergent brand, he'll probably be denying everything I say. And secondly, we want to actually get you involved and say, so how much of this is relevant for you? What's important? And actually, what's very practical and actionable right now? So that's the flow of what we're doing. I want to go right into some of the key findings, and I'm going to go at high pace because I think you'll recognize a lot of this, and at the same time, some of them may be, oh, we're not the only ones that think that's challenging. So here are some of the things that we see happening around us. We talk to CMOs and say, describe your world. What's going on in your organization? And the first thing they see as marketers is, you know, Thomas Friedman, he wrote about the world being flat. Well, that's my world. Because even though as marketing we're not going quite as fast, all the other disciplines, like finance and supply chain, they're way ahead of us. They are going very fast, and everything around us is globalizing, and I feel a huge convergence to do that too. Now, it isn't just driven by cost, although that's a very good reason. If you're fighting big global competitors, you better have an efficient cost structure. But at the same time, when we look outside and we look at the people we really work for, consumers, we do see some huge global trends. Now, I'm going to be the last in the world to say there's going to be this sort of global consumer. I think that's a very dangerous place to go. However, every one of our clients says, I'm beginning to see segments of consumers that are behaving very consistently across borders. I mean, take youth. If you think about the Chinese consumer in Shanghai, let's take a teenager in Shanghai. If you look at their habits, attitudes, behaviors, they are more alike to somebody of the same age in New York or Paris than they are to their own uncle and aunt an hour and a half outside Shanghai. That's pretty important if you're playing to that segment. You know, and youth, it's a definition that stretches. We're going to take the mickey out of the Italians a few times this presentation, but it wasn't by design. I apologize up front. But when you look at the definition of youth, it's been stretched to 37. And I was like, that's not youth. Well, apparently that's the average age that an Italian man leaves home to marry. So there's your definition of youth. Now, consumers are globalizing, we better follow fast. So what you see is that everyone is very quickly saying, how can we leverage our strength, our expertise, our scale across geographies? And basically, when we ask people, is this really happening or not? The first question here is, how important are global brands to say, you know, what percentage of their profit do they make? Or if you look at the growth strategy, how important do the global brands play versus all other brands? And one thing you see is that there's a vast majority of people saying, we're looking more and more at global brands and working globally around brands. When you say, well, but who leads these? You know, in the past, there were many organizations that basically had a sort of toolkit of brands, and a national manager could just decide whatever they wanted to do with every brand and basically slap on one positioning or another. Those days are over. A huge majority of companies say, no, those brands are also being led more centrally. Now, that may run the gamut from somebody trying to do everything, like on Gillette, to somebody saying, look, guys, you can do everything you want with the brand, but this is what it stands for. You know, don't make it a discount brand when actually what we're saying is high quality. But they are being led everywhere across the board, more centrally. So the big question, of course, is that going well? How good are you at it? And that's where the interesting dichotomy appears. Because very few people feel that their own organizations are actually doing it well. When you ask, how good are you at leveraging your scale? A tiny minority actually think they're good at it. Or I think the acid test, when you get a program right, somewhere in one market, how good are you at recognizing it, pulling it out, making it generic, and saying, guys, run with it? Very, very low percentage of people say that they're good at it. So if this in any way connects to your reality, all it means to say is, you're not alone. A lot of global marketing organizations are struggling on the one hand by saying, it's important, and on the other hand, it's hard. It takes a lot. So what we're going to talk about is a little bit of what. Now, I said companies are globalizing, brands are globalizing, but marketers are also globalizing. This is a little hobby of mine. I go to LinkedIn, totally not backed up by science because I have no idea at what pace LinkedIn itself is growing. But I just search on the job title, and I look at how many people have global marketing in their job title. And I did this, it says today, that's a lie. I did it about a week ago. And it was about 600,000. Just 2 years ago, when I started playing this little game, it was in the 50s. Now, again, LinkedIn is exploding, so I really don't know what that means. But I am very clear that the number of people that are now working on global brands has really exploded. Whether it's at a regional level, at a local level, trying to figure out what do we use, what can we use, or at a global level, responsible for coordinating and leading, that number is increasing dramatically. And we asked ourselves, and we asked, more importantly, the people in the job, what's keeping you awake at night? I mean, what excites you too? But what keeps you awake at night? And I wanted to just review those in about 10 minutes. The first, and I don't think this is a surprise, and hopefully some of this piggybacks on what Jim was saying as well, is that our world as marketers, the way we learn marketing is dramatically changing. Consumers are no longer are not just in control, they also very often decide they don't want to talk to us, they just want to talk to others about our brands. I love your Twitter feed over there. I was just reading during lunch that somebody was complaining that a bar was 3 times more expensive than a small candy, and that was S-H-I-T, you know. That's how they talk about you. You can't help it. But we're very often not in that conversation. And to a marketer, I think actually the best analogy is the one that a CMO gave to us as we were preparing the book. He said to me, you know, I used to feel that marketing was like bowling. You'd see the pins, I'd done my training, I had my ball, and if I did my moves right, I knew roughly how many pins I was going to hit. Sometimes I was lucky, sometimes I was unlucky, but I knew the game. I felt in control. Now he says, I pull like a pinball machine, I pull the lever back, let go, and pray to God that something gets hit as that thing whizzes around the screen. Isn't that true? I mean, so often the levers that we're used to being in control of just don't seem to work anymore. And it's a huge challenge to marketers everywhere, especially when you start working in a global environment. Now, a second point that people mention that really isn't unique to global, but I'll show you some examples of things that speed it up, is differentiation. Because basically, there are no more bad products. I used to work, one of my first jobs was a peanut butter. I mean, it's funny how we all, you know, you're responsible for Reese or a pot of peanut butter. When I was responsible for peanut butter, it was very simple. You stood in front of the shelf. Our peanut butter was creamy, and it never separated. That's what made it good. The other ones had oil on the top, and that's why they were cheaper. So a lot of my work was being done by the product. I didn't have to explain that. It was in the payoff, of course. Now, if there's oil on the top, it's probably organic or some other nut, and they're charging 3 times what I could charge. Something has dramatically changed. There are very, very few bad products, and there's very, very few and very short periods of differentiation if you manage to get it at a product level. I mean, look at this, HTC. Today is the big day that the new iPad is being announced. I'm sort of secretly looking at the screen on the corner of my eye. But the iPhone will come very shortly after again. This is HTC. Let me ask you, how many of you knew the brand HTC? Well, how many of you know the brand now? About half. How many of you knew this brand 2 years ago? See, it's 3%. This is how quickly things can go. HTC was a private label provider to T-Mobile, AT&T, and so. Today, this is the most advanced phone for sale in the US. Blows the iPhone and the Motorola out of the water. We don't know about it because they're not good at marketing yet. But they will be very soon. I know because I know who they're hiring. And the same happened with Samsung. Samsung, how much of a brand was that 10 years ago? And look at the stature of the brand now. So the differentiation goes very, very quickly. Not a crutch to be leaning on. And at the same time, our friends, the retailers, are actually very often not our friends but our competitors. If you look at Tesco, you know, this is something as an American audience that I think you need to be particularly awake for. In Europe, take England for an example, there are categories where the average share of private label is against 50 or 60%. 50 or 60%. I think the average in the US is 18. And what they did is very simple. They hired Procter marketeers. They hired Unilever and Mars and, you know, marketeers from good companies and said, we want to do one of those. And they built brands. This brand is actually higher in quality and quality perception than any of the big brands out there, and it's a private label. And the supermarket is laughing to the bank because they've just cut you out. At the same time, and now we get into a more global sort of challenge, there's this thing of transparency. See, the problem is the consumer and information is going far more transparent and faster than we ever are as organizations. A good example is Starbucks. When we worked with them at the time, there was an announcement, the Chinese team, there's a few people here from China, I think I saw, they're very proud because they'd been invited to open a Starbucks in the Forbidden City. Now, if you've ever been to China, you know that's not sort of a decision you take in Seattle and go, oh, let's open a Starbucks there. That's a very special place. You get invited to open a store. But it was the ultimate sign of respect and recognition that Starbucks was doing the right thing. Chinese team was very proud. American team didn't even know about it until the stuff hit the fan. In England, in America, suddenly Starbucks, front page news. Look at this American bully being insensitive to the culture of this big up-and-coming force and just opening their stores everywhere, even the Forbidden City. They were fielding PR crises, literally huge crises. And the problem was the people inside the company didn't even know about it. Well, they knew very quickly, of course. And then they couldn't do anything about it. So here they are, and responsibility and accountability are completely out of sync. So there's a real, things are moving, things are transparent. I better know as much as any consumer, and perhaps a little bit more. So as things go global, that transparency is going to drive speed very fast. Another thing that I think as a marketer, and as a colleague of a marketer, you may have noticed the debate starting and being held over and over again. You know, we used to have this sort of, yeah, 50% of marketing is wasted, but I don't know which. That was Wanamaker. It was actually about advertising. Well, today we know exactly which 50%. So if you don't have a financial team, or at least a marketing team with all the monitoring tools to know which banner or which Facebook page isn't delivering, then you're literally burning money because every second you know where the people are. And so not only do we now have transparency about where we should be spending our money, but at the same time, other disciplines in the company are saying, do you know, why don't you give me some of that money to the CFO or to the CEO? Say, I can actually get you a much quicker bang of your buck because when I look at the payback, I don't know, that equity, you know, but we want sales today, I can get it to you. So there's a real internal pressure and competitiveness that a lot of CMOs are playing back to us as important. And where the push really hits the shove is when you start talking about roles and responsibilities. Because as you become a global organization, the one thing that frustrates people most is, what do I do and what don't I do? And if I do this, who's going to interfere and who can I ignore? Companies tend to be very good at adding responsibilities to people's job descriptions, but it's uncomfortable to say to somebody, do you know what, that film, advertising from now on, we're no longer going to need your opinion on that, thank you. So it's a huge source of frustration, of lack of transparency, and it actually hurts people. Because this is the kind of stuff where people go ill. This is the kind of stuff where people have fights. The stuff we don't want at work, but that's where we are most. It's the stuff that really eats people up inside and say, I've worked so hard on this concept, and somebody that has never been in my market, that's never seen the brief, is going to tell me that this is off? Excuse me? This is where a lot of negative energy happens. And clarity on roles and responsibilities, and actually keeping the focus external. The problem is it's like lawyers in the West when they moved west from the East Coast. You know, there was one lawyer in town, he had no business. The second there was a second lawyer, lawsuits were flying left, right, and center. The moment you seem to have a second person that's thinking about your brand, it's like there's some dynamic there about who's right. And just staying true to what are we trying to do? Who's the competitor? Who are we fighting? Who's the consumer? And what's the need that we're fulfilling? And you know what? Let's work together on that, not against each other. That's a dynamic that a lot of CMOs, and that's why I'm telling you now, companies as they go global, go through. And we can do two things. We can just pretend it all doesn't happen and doesn't exist. Or at the start of that journey, we can think about it and say, let's keep our eyes open for when this starts to happen, and let's address it right now. So that's a little bit the purpose of this conversation. The last, and one of the most frustrating areas as organizations go global, is this thing about getting it right in one place and somehow not being able to communicate that. It's frustrating to a global person that's seeing that and going, Argentina just cracked that. Why aren't we doing that everywhere? That's frustrating, but I can tell you, it's a lot more frustrating when you're Germany and you know that America did this 3 years ago. You're trying to run the same program, you're trying to break open the same segment, and you can't get your hands on the learning of how the Americans did it. You can't find the people, because they've moved on. They can say, okay, this was what we were doing, this is what we're trying to do, here are the 5 things that you should never do, and here's 3 that every execution needs to include. There's nothing more frustrating than knowing the knowledge is somewhere in the company, but you just can't get your hands on it. So here's a little bit of a, if you like, a short list of the things that keep people awake. But what does it take to succeed? When do you win? And the interesting thing is, as we look at those 250 global brands, and, you know, we've looked at their market results. We look internally, just like Jim mentioned, at how eager people are to work on the business. You know, are they staying on a brand for 1.5 years? Or are they staying on a brand for 5 because they want to? And what we're now going to be sharing are what we see as the characteristics of global brands in terms of what they stand for, and the characteristics of the global marketing leaders, the people that are like you and me, that run the brand, whether it's at local, regional, or global level, it doesn't matter, that it takes to succeed. And hopefully that gets a little bit of the discussion going. The first is the what. When we looked at all these brands, and Ilana is going to talk about this in some depth, so I'll keep it very short, is that across the successful brands, the brands that win, we see 3 characteristics that they share. Not all of them have all 3, but the best do. Some of them have 2. The first is that they go global in their thinking and how they look at consumers. They climb to the very highest order of needs, and they appeal to people and recognize universal consumer needs. The thing that makes us all the same. We've all flown in from all over the world, but at the same time, there's so much the same about us. Great global brands appeal to those. The second is that they stand for a lot more than making money. They have purpose. Jim talked about it. We'll give you some more examples of categories where perhaps you didn't think it was possible. And thirdly, the marketers and everyone in the company thinks about adding value to people's lives through total experiences, not just products. They just think about where do we make sense. So that's what Ilana is going to talk about. I'm then going to pick it up afterwards and say, well, if that's what the brand stands for, that's great for one country. But how do you get that benefit into other countries, into 10, 15, 80? And that's what we call the drivers of effective global brands. How do you get people to connect across the organization? How do you inspire every stakeholder that can make or break your brand? How do you create clarity around what they should be focusing on? What should you be focusing on? What should they be focusing on? And how does it all ladder up to what you heard your chairman talk about this morning? How do the pieces fit together? Because if we don't feel that, you feel disconnected. And then who does what? If we know what we're doing, who exactly does what? Where do I start? Where do I stop? And finally, how do I give? If we know what works, how do I give everyone in the organization the information, the tools, and the examples to make it actually all work? So those are the 5 drivers of effective global brands that I will give you some examples of after that. But first, I would like to introduce my colleague Ilana Gold, and she's going to talk about the characteristics of global brands.
Thanks,
Ilana.
Mark. Okay, so I had the privilege of listening in on Jeff's presentation yesterday, where you were talking about the crime of stealing with pride. So hopefully we'll be able to provide you a couple of more examples that will enable the crime, which is actually a good crime. So as Mark mentioned, observing and studying over 250 brands, we've identified a few observations, or what we believe at least are the characteristics to make them successful: the universal truth, the purposeful positioning, and the total experience. So let me go through each one of these, and then I'll illustrate it by what we believe are some of the best practices out there, and then you'll form your own opinions. So universal truth. What is it? I'm actually going to be your facilitator for the next couple of days for the brand building framework training, so I could actually ask you that question just to get you used to the training form. But for now, I'll define it for you. Universal truth is something that is so innate to human nature that fundamentally it can be false. So now if you define that universal truth and you tap into it and you're able to create that differentiation, it will allow your brand to travel across borders. So some examples of universal truth: motherhood, making me, every mother, right, wants to do the best for her child. So how many companies have tapped into it successfully? Johnson & Johnson, Pampers has kept my daughter in diapers for 4 years, and I felt really good about it. Gerber's have all said, you know, hey, what do I do? Enable me to be a great mother, and I felt really good about using those products. So yesterday we talked about Jack, the other brand, the other whiskey brand, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Johnnie Walker. So Johnnie Walker, you're all familiar? Any fans of Johnnie Walker in the audience? Okay, a few. So when Rob Malcolm, who was a CMO at the time in 1990s, inherited the brand, it was very, very fragmented. It was not doing too well. And when the company started researching, you know, what was going on, it was actually kind of tapping into that positioning or an insight of success. And success in the United States at the time meant, well, a man sitting leisurely in a leather chair and drinking a whiskey and feeling really successful. However, in Europe, they just really didn't resonate with the consumers. So when they dug a little bit deeper, they actually felt that success was also very finite. Well, once you have success, then what? And so what they've uncovered is actually progress was something that was a little bit more motivating to men at the time. It is a brand that is actually focuses on the male consumer. So progress to lead your family or provide your family a better life, to be successful in your career, is something that resonated and transcended borders. Now, the trick about universal truth is to actually tap into it in such a way and action it in such a way as a brand that you make it differentiated and then you make it your own to your own business and your own proposition. So now the universal truth should transcend borders and should hold the brand together. However, how you execute the brand should be localized to that unique local market and nuances and the insights that take place within the local market. So this is just a really good example to showcase. I'll play 3 ads for you, one from the US, how they've executed and tapped into the truth, Thailand, and China. Can we roll the film, please?
ได้ไหมครับตอนใช่ไหมใช่ครับไปไงมาไงล่ะไปด้วยกันไหมครับเดี๋ยวผมไปส่งดูแข็งแรงดีนะครับโอ้ยร่างกายครูก็แก่ลงไปตามกาลเวลาอะไรมันก็ดูเปลี่ยนแปลงไปอย่างเช่นเกาะนี้ทีนี้ก็เปลี่ยนแปลงไปเป็นของในทุนหมดแล้วรู้ไหมโรงเรียนเธอก็จะไม่เหลือแล้วผมมี
ของขวัญจะให้ครูครับ
อะไรล่ะขอบใจนะบริษัทนี้แหละที่มากว้านซื้อที่ดินบริเวณนี้
ครูครับบริษัทของผมเองครับ
ช่วยจอดรถบริเวณครูลงหน่อย
ครูครับ
ไม่ต้องอธิบายให้ครูลงก่อนสงสัยครูคงไม่ใช่ครูที่ดีของเธอ
ผมอยากให้ครูเก็บไว้นะครับ
ครูครับครูเป็นครูที่ดีที่สุดของผม
怎么办？别想了，已经定了。
怎么回事？先坐下吧。你还记得这个约定吗
？3年了。
你已经帮我们成为顶尖的建筑设计公司，你做到了。
所以你被开除了。是时候去追求你自己的梦想了。你不是一直想成为世界级的导演吗？你有远大的未来。就算离开这里，也不会是一个人面对的。Keep walking.
Keep walking.
So, yeah, Johnnie Walker remains one of the best brands at Diageo. So again, that universal, that innate fundamental truth transcends borders. But how they've cleverly allowed that to take on the individualism of the country is very powerful. And that's, again, what made this brand very, very successful. So I know that we talked a little bit about Old Spice, another very powerful brand out there. That caters to teenage boys or youth, maybe from 13 to 37, I don't know, but let's keep it to 13 to 18. So I don't know anybody who has teenage boys in the audience. All right. Well, I think that there is one truth, right, and I don't even need to explicitly talk about it, that motivates these kids. So let me show you an ad that featured. In the UK to bring that universal truth to life with Jennifer Aniston.
Boom shakala good world. Boom shakala good world.
David!
What?
I've ironed your shirt for you.
The Lynx Effect. The Lynx Effect.
Okay, a multi-billion-dollar empire and a universal truth that is just so easy to find, right? But they were able to do something with it that only they're able to do. Now, Mark alluded a little bit to the Italians. They tried to play this ad in Italy, and it didn't quite work because the Italian man thought that Jennifer was a sister. Because in Italy, I guess because they stayed home until 37, the sister irons the shirts. So they didn't get it. It is a decade old. I'm hoping that we've moved on. So that is the notion of the universal truth. So the second winning characteristic is purposeful positioning. So what does that mean? What is purposeful positioning? And that is actually, there's a realization amongst marketeers that it is not only about building a brand for pure profit's sake. You have to actually, consumers are looking and demanding for more. So now, if you develop a purpose for the brand, then hopefully, indeed, you generate a lot more money across a lot more countries and in a more sustainable way. So there's a couple of great examples of brands, and Jim also talked a lot about that, of brands that really, really have a purpose behind them. The Body Shop, I guess close to 30 years ago, was the first brand that really spoke against testing on animals. Starbucks provides a living wage for its employees and pays insurance. And Dove, one of my favorite brands, really battles the stereotypes of beauty around the world. And I think many of you are familiar with the Real Beauty campaign, right? And the deep universal insight, actually, and the truth that no matter where we are in the world, but women do see a certain stereotype, and it has been very, very damaging for teenage girls almost everywhere. So to really be able to be bold and to build a campaign that's now lasted over 5 or 6 years has been very, very powerful. So let me play also a film for you that demonstrate how they bring this purpose to life.
Show me a smile then. Don't be unhappy, can't remember when I last saw you laughing. If this world makes you crazy and you've taken all you can bear, you call me up because you know I'll be there. And I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. So don't be afraid to let them show. You're beautiful like a rainbow.
Okay. Now, I know one could potentially say, okay, well, these are brands that naturally lend themselves to more involvement. So it's easy to build a purpose for that. So here's an example of a brand called Deluxe that travels. It actually is known by different names around the world, but it is united under a common purposeful positioning. So one of the things that the marketeers have uncovered, I guess their universal truth, is if you paint or change the color of your room, that you feel different. Actually, you feel better, even if you painted black, right, as the song goes. So, so tapping into that insight, I actually said, well, what can we do? As you have to admit, it doesn't get any more functional than that, right? It's paint. So how can we deliver on a greater purpose? And so they started with a project which is called Color the World that they launched in Brazil in the shanty towns in the outskirts of Rio, which was cleared of the drug dealers. And they actually painted the town. You'll see an example of that, which has really added meaning to the community. And now they have, and purpose and value, happiness, hopefully. And now they've spread this project around the world. And think about, just a company like this that tries to recruit marketeers from a lot of sexy companies out there, right? So what can a paint company actually offer them? And when you see something like that, you feel pretty inspired as a consequence, I think, to be able to do such great work. And again, it became one of the biggest consumer paint brands out there. If I may share with you another example, maybe a very personal example, but my daughter has the opportunity to go actually quite a lot to Hershey, particularly in the summer. And last summer, she was just very fascinated by the story of the school and the school. And so I told her about it. And a few weeks ago, she was eating one of these, and she said, "Mommy, is that from a company that helps children?" And I find it very, very emotional. And I said, "Well, of course, honey, otherwise we wouldn't buy anything else." But so, thank you for inspiring my daughter. But this is, again, the kind of things that I think make a difference in our consumers' life and make me feel good as a mother actually purchasing your products as well. So that is purposeful positioning. Now, the other characteristic, a little bit different, right? They need to paint it. They'll be coordinating with Deluxe. So the other characteristic is this total experience. Now, what is total experience, or what are the manifestations of total experience? Mark alluded that in the world of transparency, commoditization, how the heck do we really break through to our consumers and have them stay with our brands for a while, or stay with us for a while, right? So the total experience is, again, something that marketeers are now thinking about, of how do we deliver as much value as possible when we think about their life holistically. Not only as it relates to our brand, but do we know as much about them as we possibly can, and can our brand add as much value to them as possible? So we had the opportunity to speak with the CMO from Nike a couple of months ago. And I actually thought that Nike was a product brand, great brand, but product brand. And I was corrected when I was told that it's actually a brand that provides services for anyone who really wants to participate in sports. Yes, they provide great products, equipment, right? But they're also coaches and facilitators, and they really enable for anyone to have a great experience when it comes to sports. So, for example, this is just an illustration of some of their products that they're providing out there. If you want to do a 3-mile run around your neighborhood, be it via iPhone or on your computer, you can log on and you can actually get the best routes possible, right? And your friends and neighbors will also recommend routes, or if you want to avoid your neighbors, you can get another route. And that's what I mean by the experience. That's what they deliver, that value, keeping up continuously with the time to make sure that they stay relevant to the consumer. So one of the other things that they've done is connect people around the world. So I don't know if anybody has participated, but the day the world runs, the human race of about 10 miles, and that happens over a 24-hour period where everybody around the world just basically participates in this event. So I think that they had about close to 1 million people last year. So when you do something like that, you're also bringing a community of people together, and which makes you obviously a lot more memorable. If we can see the final ad.
Someone up front, you better get cheap.
Some of my friends who are avid runners will say, yeah, Lana, but they don't make the best shoe necessarily in the market. You know what? They don't have to because they sell the most shoes around the world. So that's about purposeful positioning and total experience and universal truth. And if you see, they sort of go hand in hand, I think, in tandem, right? So if you can tap into something, sometimes that we believe is so difficult to find, and it's not. Universal truth, they're out there. I think, Jim, actually, we've quoted you in the book where you said, hey, if a marketeer hasn't laddered up to that universal truth, then he or she was just being lazy. So once you can tap into something like this and think about, well, what is it that, how do I action that universal truth in the most meaningful, inspirational way possible, and then how do I deliver value over time to my consumer, and how do I grow with the consumer? It doesn't have to happen all at once. Obviously, these brands, it's taken them years to get to where they are, but I think that they followed that path, and I think that this is what I would leave you to think about. How do you follow that same path with some of your brands? So that's on the what of winning brands, and Mark, if you can share with us the how of leading these global brands.
Thank you, Ilana. A closing thought on that, because it's so special that we're here with you, Hershey, today. Very often we find that when brands come to us and say, we're looking for that purpose. It's a buzzy word at the moment. P&G used the AAA meeting and created a lot of furor around it. Where do we look? And the answer is almost always in your roots. I don't know many big successful companies that started out to make a lot of money. They were usually 1 or 2 or 3 founders that wanted to make a difference in the world, that really felt passionate about doing something and made money on the way because consumers recognized that it was good. It's a good product. The company stood for something. It's a good company. You can hear your dad saying it to you. You can hear your mom saying it to you. You guys are a good company. You guys have such rich roots. What you so often hear is that people actually in the company have forgotten how much good you do, how much good you've done, how much good you do every day over. In our book, we talk about Coca-Cola. And Marc Mathieu, the CMO of Coke, was basically looking at the vision, looking at the purpose. And they did a real cataloging of where are people spending their time and what inspires them about being at Coke. And they basically came up with this whole bucket of activities that didn't fit in the official strategy. And it was all about making a positive difference in the world. And they said, this is crazy. We're spending a lot of time here. We're spending a lot of money on this. And it's the kind of stuff that inspires us. And it's not in the strategy. Well, then the strategy is wrong. And they reformulated the strategy to include the purpose. It sounds to me, when I listen about the stories about the foundation, when I hear about the incredible things you do with the school, it reminds me, we worked on the global repositioning of Sony last summer. And Sony has a huge background in helping people, also educational, but all around sounds and hearing people with sound, helping them speech and then read on and so. And nobody knew about how much was actually happening. Wouldn't surprise me if you are doing far more than you give yourself credit for. Look back in your roots before you look forward and think that somehow you need to create something new. So that's the what. Now, how many of us recognize the story of a great strategy? You read the deck, you read the pages, and you think, this all makes sense. And the next question is, so why is it just in my drawer? Or why didn't this happen? I just read this, I got my new job, I looked, so why didn't we do this? I think we all recognize that there is an enormous quantity of great strategies out there at local, regional, and global level that somehow don't get executed or don't get executed beyond one place. Is that something that you recognize? Yeah. So we wanted to talk about, so why is that? And what does it take to actually to make that happen? What we call the how. So I'm going to go around that circle that I described before, the drivers of effective global brand leadership. And the first one is connect. You can't build a global organization, you can't be successful globally, I'm putting myself out there, but I truly believe this, if the people that work on your brand everywhere don't feel connected, not just to the purpose of the brand, but to each other. If they don't feel that they're on the same team as the people in Germany, and the people in Hershey, and the people in Manila. If you don't feel that the people that are drawing up strategies know your market reality, know your key competitors, then how good can the strategy be? There is no global market, there's just lots of local markets. So we study this dynamic between countries, between a country and a regional headquarter, or a country and the global headquarter, and we say, how good is that connection? But also between R&D and marketing, or between sales and marketing. How connected do people feel? Are they on the same team? And what does it take? Well, the first thing to sort of note is that, and this, by the way, is stolen with great pride by us, of Stephen Covey, who wrote the book, The 7 Habits. How many people of you have read that? Good. I'm also a huge fan. And he describes these 3 phases of maturity. The first being overly dependent. This is the 2 to 10-year-old that does everything the parents say. Although nobody seems to have explained that to my 2-year-old daughter, because she's 2 and everything is no. She's somehow not in the dependent phase yet. But typically, when you look at sort of the dynamic between countries and HQ, this will happen when markets have just opened up. When you have young, enthusiastic marketers that want to get going, but actually perhaps just don't know enough about the market and the business and the category dynamics to filter central guidelines and say, yeah, that's good, actually that's different here. So an overly dependent relationship is very comfortable because you say something if you're in a regional team or a global team and they do it. Or you say something as the local marketer and sales runs with it. But that's overly dependent. You need that filter to say, actually, given my retail dynamics, that's not going to fly here, based on fact. So overly dependent is comfortable, but not a place you want to be. Very dangerous things happen when a central plan just gets rolled out blindly. Where most companies get stuck is what we would call the very, very painfully independent phase. It's the teenage syndrome. It's the, you know what? I don't care about the truth, but I am out to prove you wrong. My plan is better. This is about countries actually shadow market researching things or having pet projects that are under the radar that we don't share with each other. Or a researcher saying, you know what, that might be the strategy, but I really like this thing, right? And it's off strategy. It's that I am out to prove you wrong dynamic rather than what are we working on together. It's not a good place to be. It's a place that causes lots of pain and frustrations and fights. And again, lack of focus on where we really should be looking outside. The consumer, the competitor, the retailer. This is the place you want to get out of as quickly as possible. But there is a better place. Covey calls it the interdependent relationship. We call it blissfully interdependent. I think that as you see these, what are they, New Zealand blacks, and they're doing their, what's it called again? The haka. Well, I think as the South Africans in the bottom of the picture are looking at that, there's no internal strife there. They're just all scared, right? It's a unifying factor. A common enemy is a really good way to unify people. But these people know that if anyone stumbles, everybody fails. Interdependency is about real respect for the other players and knowing that what he or she is doing might not be relevant for me today, but boy, is it going to make me successful tomorrow. And people honestly have to believe that. And similarly, that somebody that's working on something for next year says, you know what, I'm working on this long-term strategic thing that's very, very important, but not urgent, and I'm just going to trust them to take it and give it a go in the market in the way that's most appropriate. It's about not reinventing each other's activities. Jim talked about it as well. So what does it take to get to this interdependency? Well, I'd like to sort of launch 2 concepts and see if they're useful to you or not. The first is for everybody that leads. Now, I would actually say to you, you probably all lead. You all have people that look to you for direction on where we're going. The mindset of leadership that is successful in global organizations that we see as a characteristics of those key leaders that have driven the biggest global growth is this concept of servant leadership. Yes, I'm your leader, but ultimately, I'm serving your needs. My role is to make you successful. That's really about earning the right to take decisions. It's about learning what is key in every market that really matters. I'm not saying that if you're in a regional role or in a global role, you should be, knowing exactly what happens in your number 15 and 16 market. I am saying that you should really understand the key dynamics of your top 10 markets. If the leaders, and this is, by the way, how we find out. We call, the marketing director of Germany, and we say to them, so what's the global team doing? Well, there's basically two types of answers. The first, which is not where you want to be, is, I don't know. I have no idea what they do over there, but you know what? They come once a year and they launch their plans, and we'll just see if we buy them or not. Or, you know what? They have their pet projects in that ivory tower over there, and I don't think it makes any sense. It's certainly not for my market. Not the place you want to be. The other is basically, I know exactly what they're doing because I asked them to do it. They're here twice a year. Maybe if you're number 15 and 16 in the hierarchy of importance of countries, once a year. Maybe if it's the 23rd country of importance, it's actually once every 2 years. But nevertheless, people feel listened to, and key stakeholders, and I would argue we all only have 25 really important stakeholders, but we have them. And what these successful global marketing leaders do is they make them important, and they make sure that those people know what their key market dynamics are. They know what their leadership thrusts are and how they will lead to success in the market. But it won't be successful if you don't have the second part of the equation, which is a looking for similarities mindset, a global mindset. Now, as a marketer, you can't create this. That's what the CEO does. That's what the CFO does. That's what actually everybody in the company that leads needs to do, which is basically say, look, we know you're different. I mean, there's this old joke, I don't know if you know it, about the Gillette chairman, who said we used to have a fight in the company where the French were always arguing that they were different to the Argentinians. And we stopped fighting. We now agree with the French that they're different, we just treat them the same. That's not what I mean. This is about stepping back, and it's a little hobby of mine. I always look at interviews with astronauts, and I look for something. And if you start looking, you'll find it always. They say, once you're up there, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Chinese, a Russian, or an American astronaut talking, and you look back and you go, how do we make things so difficult for ourselves? When we share so many of the same qualities, how come it is our nature to look for the differences rather than the similarities? There's a little game I could play with you where I show a picture of what I introduced to be an aircraft. And I ask you to quickly write down 3 things you notice about it. And it's basically the wings face the other way that you're used to. The cockpit is in the wrong place. And when I ask people for the feedback, 80% of the comments will be negative. It is innate to look for what's wrong rather than what's right. But actually, it's the ship that won the race to be the first commercial station to go to space. And so, who knows, maybe 1 or 2 of us will be in that one day. Looking for similarities doesn't come naturally. You're on a journey to go global. You're on a journey to learn from each other globally. All I'm saying is, don't expect anyone, least of all yourself, to do this naturally. You need to make it important. As for all of these drivers of global marketing effectiveness, they don't naturally appear on your agenda. You have to make them important and create the time and create the effort. But looking for similarities is an incredibly important fundamental culture that you need to create as you go global. Now, let's say people feel connected. Inspiration. This is the stuff. Imagine if the CFO walks into your office and says, we found 40% more budget. Would you like it? Yeah. Funny enough, I actually believe that's true. When you think about purpose, and you think about the difference in somebody's effort, in somebody's creativity, in the time they spend at work, between somebody that's really inspired on a personal level about what they're doing with the brand, those Dove marketeers that were refusing promotions because they didn't want to leave the brand, versus a 9-to-5er that's sitting in traffic. The question is, what are they thinking about in traffic? Is it your brand? Is it your challenges? Or is it what's for dinner? That's the 40%, and I might be underestimating it, that you have up for grabs as a leader. If you can tap into that, if you can make what your brand does personal, then you have that to go. I mean, it might be purpose, a higher purpose, and Hershey certainly has, as I said, a serious play there. It's true to you. It's in your heritage. But it doesn't matter. It could also be success. It could also be something about, going into new markets. Whatever it is, people need to have a real personal sense. And it's those 20 stakeholders. But if everybody has 20 stakeholders, everyone in the company will be covered. Now, that's when you get even the shower time. I asked my wife to take that picture last week. It's in the line of business. I get one joke. She gets all the sexy videos. So let's say people are inspired. What do you do? Because, there's actually, on the one hand, it's motivating that you get all these emails after a global conference. We got it, we're inspired, and this is what we're going to do. And it's completely all over the place. That's just about the most dangerous thing you could do, because then you're not leveraging your scale. So how do you create a focus between what Dave said this morning are the key thrusts for Hershey? The things you read about Hershey in the Financial Times, and the things you talk about in Manila to the sales force. Because if a salesperson in Manila isn't able to somehow correlate and cascade what he reads on the bbc.com and what he's being asked to do, then somehow the two feel disconnected. And it isn't a lot of work. But particularly in multi-brand companies, it's amazing. When I go into multi-brand companies, I ask people to just present their brand plans. And I say, can I just see the other brand? Don't you also have some other brands in the same category? So why don't you mention them? Why don't you explain to your people how you are different to each other? How very explicitly, as you develop things, you don't want this brand to go over here because that's the space. But we build these little kingdoms. And so making explicit how everything links and complements each other is a job for us, the marketing leaders. Because if we don't do it, you can be sure that people somewhere that are being asked to work on multiple brands are going, let me try and interpret that. And you don't want them to do that themselves. You'd like to be the one that shapes that. And how do you measure success? Now, what we found more and more, and this is just a sort of an example, it's not the Bible, is that companies are beginning to reorganize not just around geographies, but also very much around what are we trying to do in that market? And it might actually be that the market that is breaking into it. I mean, I'll give you an example. Smirnoff, an ex-client of mine, went into China, and they did these big music events. That's what they were doing. They were hugely successful. Lots of youth came out, and dancing, music, and everything. Sales, 0. So I thought, okay, well, we better do some more in-depth research. So they got people into focus groups, and they said, yeah, we're Smirnoff. Ah, Smirnoff, good brand, hip, very nice. Yeah, good. So why don't you buy it? No, Smirnoff, sexy, music, boom, boom, dance, yeah. Okay, but why aren't you drinking it? And they were saying, like, what is it? I don't know what it is. That might be a problem. If you haven't explained, and literally, the Chinese don't know vodka. They know Johnnie Walker. It's very successful there. They don't know. They don't know how to mix it. They don't know if it's male or female. They don't know if you drink it straight and when. Well, then how can you expect them to start buying it? So there are markets that can be clustered in what they're trying to do. And here you can see that it might be that you're really fighting to explain what the product is. Or maybe you've moved on and there's competitors, and now it's actually about how you emotionally are differentiated compared to your competitors. But it might actually be that you're already beyond that and that you're really looking at aspirational and even societal challenges. The paint example, Deluxe colors the world is global. But in China, the payoff is something like, we don't kill you. Because paint in China, very often, remember the toys that we had to send back? very often it's not actually very safe. And they're very much on a functional platform, but still consistent to the global need. So think about how you segment and how you get people focused, but make sure that everyone, from their own perspective, understands how the pieces fit together. And then organize. I mentioned it before. We actually came into the study with completely the wrong assumption. You see, we thought marketers went to business school, paid a lot of money, and then what do you learn? You learn Kotler, right? The 6 Ps or the 8 Ps, and they keep going up. And so a real marketer does everything. Well, that turns out to be wrong. We thought that would be the motivator for marketers. The most motivated marketers are the ones that are allowed to decide most. Turns out to be completely wrong. The most motivated marketers are the Procter marketers that sit in Argentina. And if I look at their job scope, it's actually very, very precise and focused on local execution. But they are highly motivated because there is absolute clarity about where it is they start and stop, who can interfere and who can't, and how they're measured in their success. And that it's crucial to the company's success. That's what you need to have clear, because otherwise this is the stuff where people get into fights. And finally, some ways to look at that. It doesn't really matter what role you play. The only thing that matters is that everybody understands it. So as you're evolving, and this is just, again, one example, you may even have different roles on different brands, but the global team plays a certain role, and that by definition means that a regional or a local player will play another role. And if they're not completely clear about where that line sits, then they're going to be frustrated with each other. And there are different roles. I mean, if you think about this for a moment, the driver role there in the bottom, that's where the what, i.e. what the brand stands for, is completely the same. Think of Gillette. But also the how. They know, because Gillette only has 2 competitors worldwide, they know how to beat those 2 competitors. They've completely locked down how to market Gillette in any market. If you're a local Gillette marketer, you don't have a lot of leeway for changing things. But then if you look at Dove, for example, it's a champion brand. Because not only are they trying to create an enormous consistency in products, because they have to play against big global players, but Dove on average, think of Burt's Bees and all the others, they have about 50 to 100 competitors in every market. So how the local marketers interpret and work with the global mixes to make them successfully locally is crucial. Now, again, there's no hard and fast, this is right and this is wrong. The only thing that matters is that when we come in and call the local, the regional, and the global person and say who does what, that you get one answer. If it's fudgy, you're in trouble. So keep an eye on for that clarity. And finally, build. You get it right so often. So often we've done it somewhere else and we know how to do it. And you don't want to thrust the American plan down Germany's throat. But you do want to say, here's a checklist of 5 things you do when you market shampoos. And here are 3 things to never do, because those are the codes of the category. Those are the things that our other competitors might be doing. And so giving people the tools and the information, and that's why it's so gratifying to hear that you have a big initiative coming on the next few days, is crucial to leveraging success. How else are you going to actually be better than a company that's just in different countries, but not building bridges all between? So it's about creating one language. It literally is about sometimes, how do we do marketing? When we say a brand, what do we mean? How do we define a brand? So often, lots of us come from different backgrounds, and one says this and the other says that, and they mean the same thing. Well, we can't compare notes if we're not speaking the same language. So big companies like yours often spend energy on creating one common language. Crucial. But then, as you move into categories, there will be things to do and don't. So what are the category dynamics? The pictures here are of a hair academy that we worked on once. And finally, the brand. You know, it's very nice that you're going to work on our brand, but I don't want you to touch my brand before you understand 200 years of heritage. I don't want you to do anything before you understand what the vision is for the next 5 years. So being aligned globally on what it is we're trying to do as a brand so that you have that equipment, and then you get the tools and the information and the competitive insights and so to actually apply it in your market. But the trick is, the good global marketing companies, they realize there's a lot of that, and then you have to step and let go. And empower those marketeers that know their markets, and if they don't, they should, to do what's needed to make that proposition relevant there. And only those companies that get that mix right really leverage all of the drivers of effective global brands. So it's about connecting, it's about inspiring, it's about focus, organize, and then build. Now I want to give you one small example before we talk about Hershey's to just sort of bring it together, both the what and the how. It's about a detergent brand. Jim, is he still here? He left. So I can say anything I want. Tide happens to be the biggest brand in the world. It's an inconvenient truth to anybody that's worked for Unilever. They happen to be quite successful. This is the #2 success brand in the world. But I've studied it quite closely, and I do think there's some real lessons learned here. This is about a brand that actually put Procter & Gamble on its back leg, got them very nervous, and actually beat them out of some significant markets. Dirt is good, is the concept. Think about it. What have we for 50 years been told about all the detergent manufacturers? Dirt is very, very bad. Implicitly, you are a terrible mother if your kids walk around in dirty clothes. You might as well not send them to school anymore. You clearly are a very, very bad mother. For 50 years, we've had doctors with white coats, male and female, drawing chemistry formulas on a whiteboard saying, EDTA is what you need to get those stains out, right? And it was, your molecule is better than mine. And Procter & Gamble happens to be extremely good at that game. Now, what you did hear Jim say is that at one point they realized they'd gone far too far overboard. Well, their main competitor realized that too, and actually found a soft spot, a little underbelly that said, you know what? That's not what great motherhood is about. Actually, the insight is that when you let your children play, they develop. And there's a lot of science behind that as well. There's a, believe it or not, there's two Yale professors, and they completely focus on child development. And experiential learning only happens when you're not behind the book writing formulas. Now, if we just step back and say, so is this global? Yes. I've seen tapes of Chinese mothers and Indian mothers describing how their children come home from school, very proud with a test where they got a 9.5 out of 10. And the only question was, why didn't you get a 10? I know American parents that have a timetable above their fridge where there are 7 activities, from piano to swimming to this, and I see some people nodding, where we totally overprogram the lives of our kids. This is global. We're actually playing in a backyard, climbing a tree, falling down, hopefully not too high, and learning all those lessons. There's hard science that children need that as experiential learning. And somebody that was very smart, I wish I could shake his hand, said, dirt isn't bad. Dirt is really good. It means that you're a brilliant mother. And it's one of those concepts, I don't know about you, but you know, I remember, it was actually in New York City. I saw a flyer and it said, dirt is good. And I stopped in my tracks and I thought, hey, somebody's doing something different here. Well, it happened in Brazil. It started in Brazil. Just funny enough, like the concept of Deluxe paint, which started in Rio. Dirt is Good was a Brazilian brand director that said, we're going to try this, we're going to do something. And then it went to Argentina, and I'm going to show you one little film that just brings the concept to life. Could you show it, please?
Perdón, mamá. Perdón, mamá. No sé. No me di cuenta. ¿Dónde tenía la cabeza? Estaba distraído salvando vidas humanas. Alimentando a mi hija, su hija, tu nieta, mamá. Pasó mientras estaba ayudando a otros, dejando atrás miedos ilógicos. Acá me ensucié aprendiendo a tener ideas propias. Acá aprendiendo a no ser egoísta. A relacionarme con los demás. Jugar así me ayudó a darme cuenta que ayudar está bueno. A no abandonar ante una dificultad. Perdón, mamá. Ensuciándome fortalecí mi autoestima. Para en un futuro no permitir que nadie me lleve por delante. Vos ya lo sabes. ¿Te perdonás, mamá, por ensuciarme? No fue muy maduro de mi parte. Te prometo que lo voy a volver a hacer.
I think you get the concept. The what of the brand is purposeful. It works. And the funny thing was that very frustrated people at the headquarters were saying, okay, we have this in Brazil, We have this in Argentina. We actually kick butt. Market share is going up. It went from 80 to 88% market share, even on a market that you think you couldn't grow. Why isn't this everywhere? And that's where the problem came in. You had all these regional divisions. And detergents is a big business. So if you're the chairman of a local country, detergents will be 60% of your sales. You tend to want to get your hands dirty, and no pun intended, and actually be involved. So what was happening was the concept wasn't spreading. In fact, within Unilever, they say that Procter was smart and was spotting it, was rolling it out faster than they themselves were. So they stepped back and they said, we need somebody to coordinate this. And it's roughly the same time as Procter started doing this. They appointed one person to say, you're now the head. Funny enough, they didn't make her more senior than the rest. They just said, you are the point person for this brand. Now, one job, get this brand rolled out globally. And there were about 24 different concepts. Her role was to convince, to connect, and do all the things that are there. And we had the opportunity to observe that journey. And she went back to the basics, I think, as any marketer would, and said, well, okay, the mix, the what, it needs to be perfect. And she drilled down even further, and she created programs across the world with playgrounds being created, for example, in Thailand. But the concept was good, but it was all push. She was trying to do more of the same, and people weren't buying it within the organization. Then she did what any other marketer would do, create a new film, fire the agency. And, you know, she allows me to present this and can smile about it now. But it was very painful. She created a film. I'm not going to show it to you. It was good. BBH was the agency. They're brilliant. They did the Johnnie Walker work as well. But guess what? There were meetings where these regional people would come together with the global people. And the global people wanted to show their new movie. And the regional people couldn't even bother to come over and look at it. They didn't brief it. They weren't involved. They didn't feel ownership. And it was all push. So the film flunked. So she did the last thing that she thought she could do, which is, okay, Mark, I listen. We've got to inspire people more. Let's get everybody together. And that was actually a pretty good move. She brought all the marketers that worked, just like today, to one place. It was the first time it had ever happened. And they really thought about what is this positioning. In fact, everybody that worked on the brand spent an afternoon bringing the purpose alive, building a playground in a South Africa, Cape Town township. Pretty powerful stuff when you experience it yourself. But the funny thing was, everybody left the room. 250 people were there for 3 days. And we went through the feedback forms. And all the regional people were there and some global people. About 12. They were called the global brand team. And yes, there was a lot of excitement about what the brand stood for. But there was one message that came across loudest and clearest. It was, thank God that you are now all speaking one tongue. Finally, you've managed to align yourself, and there's one message. And we just orchestrated it. We had the CEO talk, we had the head of the detergents category talk, we had the head of the brand talk, and we had every head of the region talk. And they were almost sort of being brought up on stage like this to talk about it. And they sat in a circle, and I remember like yesterday, the head of Asia said, wow, if we can inspire people that much by pretending to be aligned, what would happen if we really were aligned? This is the truth. So they stepped back, and I'm just going to walk you through the next slides, but you don't have to read them. They had 3 two-day sessions where they basically listened to each other and said, what's going on with the consumer? What are the competitive dynamics? And how are we going to lead this brand? That was a very explicit question for them. They even said, when we meet, how are we going to work to ultimately get all these different propositions into one dirt is good proposition? They wrote the first brand vision plan, which had never been done, that had truly been signed. It had been done the year before, but it hadn't been distributed anywhere because people didn't agree with it. Now they owned it all, and they wrote a strategy that they owned. And in fact, they even said, how are we going to work together? If you think about organize, they said, let's meet once a quarter. And what do we do those 2 days? And when we speak to each other every month, what's the agenda for the 2 hours that we talk? Really making explicit for themselves that this was new, that they'd never done it before. And funny enough, this is one of those things that you can't go to your boss and say, how do you do this? Because he or she didn't. You guys are paving the way for global marketing. It didn't happen in the past. You're writing the rules. And again, making that important and just being explicit about the fact that you're inventing it as you go forward, that's the key to success rather than having a steady answer. And finally, on build, they really went from an intranet, which was like a boring place where you could maybe find an old strategy document, to the #1 brand intranet within Unilever. Remember, Unilever has about, I don't know, 200-300 brands, where everything you needed to know was there. Strategies, but also lots of little videos. People were encouraged to film programs in store with consumer programs and upload them, and there were prizes. And at the yearly event, those people would get rewarded. So the global behaviors that Jim talked about promoting, that was happening. But there was also real resource behind it. Not just the junior assistant. This was important. It got real budgets and real senior attention. So what I just wanted to show you was that across the brand, Aline, that's her name, Aline Santos, didn't just make sure that the what was good, because it was. She didn't create it. She never pretended that she was the one that had done that. She actually said, we walk on shoulders. But what she can take responsibility for is then saying, how do we get everybody on board, connected, inspired, focused, clear on their role, and then with the tools and the tricks and the information and the competitive intelligence to make it happen. That's what she did. Now, that's the dig rule, or the dig story, sorry. And now we wanted to turn it on back to you, because we've talked a lot. We realize that, and we've broken every rule in the book about, you know, not showing a sexy picture every 45 minutes and so. But now it's about you, and hopefully that actually does help. Oh, sorry, the result. It is the #1 growth brand in Unilever now. It went from a very stagnant brand to a double-digit growth brand. But I want to talk about the discussion we're going to have here now. On your desk, you'll find a workbook. And maybe we can turn the lights up a little bit, please. This is going to take 15 minutes, and then we'll have a break. So please stay with us. And what you'll see is there is a discussion A, a discussion B, and a discussion C. Now, let me explain something. I would like all the tables here in this row, just the first row, I'd like you to focus on exercise A. These 2 rows on B, and those 2 rows on C. And this is what I'd like you to do. Please take 5 minutes, and don't talk amongst yourselves yet. Fill in the form. Then we'd like you to take 15 minutes, and as a table, get to a view on what are the most important things for that challenge that are relevant for Hershey. And we're going to ask 1 person per table, so please choose a spokesperson to just speak up, and we probably won't get to every table, but we'll get to a few of them, to just say, well, as we were looking at this, whether it's A, B, or C, what we think is most relevant to Hershey is the following. So please now take 5 minutes, and then discuss amongst yourselves for 15 minutes. Thank you. To bring your story together and choose 1 person at your table to speak on your behalf, please. 5 more minutes. There. Good. So let's just... This is... I'll tell you what I'm doing. So I was at a conference recently, and there was a guy who watched me desperately try and get attention, and he was a very experienced speaker. And he said, Mark, you're doing it completely the wrong way. And I said, okay, so teach me, I can learn. And he said, the way to get an audience quiet is to do shh. I thought, yeah, he's pulling my leg, and no way am I going to do that. But then he was on after me, and he did it, and it worked. It's apparently we're all innate that our parents said shh to us when we were crying. When we hear shh, even if it's far in the background, we shut up. Use it at home, it works. Anyway, what I wanted to do was, this isn't real if you don't make it real. I mean, we're very honored to be invited here. Hopefully the fact that we find this important comes across, but I very well realize that it's word on a piece of paper. It's a framework that we've created to try and help people do this, to help people like we were in our role. But it's nothing if it isn't relevant for you, and actually it doesn't offer some sort of guidance and maybe some quick steps and some shortcuts to do what others have learned the hard way. Over the next few days, you're going to be doing this. Over the next few years, you're going to be doing this, if I understand your journey well. But just as a sort of checkpoint to see, are these concepts even relevant, I wanted to ask for a little bit of feedback from the room. And we've had you talk to each other in tables, but we've had 3 different zones. So this is an opportunity to just share with your colleagues. There's no right or wrong answer. There is what you think is important as a table. So let's start at the beginning. And this is about what challenges are really important. And as you listened to the list and saw what other marketeers were struggling with, what's real for Hershey? So the table over there, would one of you please take the microphone and just share with your colleagues your short list? And if you could stand and just say who you are, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Lisa Roundtree. I'm the head of the Hershey franchise in the US. Our table really had one common theme coming out when it comes to challenges from a global brand standpoint, and that is, while we aspire really dramatically to behave like a global company, at the end of the day, we're still incredibly US-centric. So while people will travel to other markets, will do an immersion day or two, will appreciate the challenges at the time, you go back home, you go back to your office, and you sort of forget about it a couple weeks later. And so how do we take this fantastic portfolio of brands we have and truly make them global when we do lack the depth of insight to know those consumers outside of what the majority of folks in the US are used to seeing? So how do we provide that leadership and bring that forward for folks? Likewise, we're used to being the dominant player, right? So it's not only a consumer challenge, but also a customer challenge. We're used to walking in and having the power of heritage on our side and the power of the Hershey company on our side. Our associates around the world, they don't have that luxury. They don't walk in and say, hey, I'm from Hershey, you should carry it because, I'm Hershey. They're like, yeah, have a nice day. Who are you? So, until we get that broader appreciation, how we do that is sort of our stumbling block, I think, for our table.
No, very clear, very clear. And the funny thing is, if you turn that on its head and say, we're the dominant player in the US, so the US doesn't have a lot of places to learn from, but there's lots of other countries that are not the dominant player, and they have lots of other countries to learn from. So maybe the communication there will offer a lot. Let's take one other challenges table. And could somebody just, thank you. Please say who you are and what you do.
My name is Frederic Giroux. I'm the marketing director for chocolate in Mexico. And in the table, we have people from Brazil. So we have an interesting perspective to share from our side. The first challenge we are seeing is probably what we will need to do is to create and sharpen a global architecture in the brand. We believe that there are very strong brands. So what would be, this ownable interpretation that could translate in all the countries? Again, we know that there is a very strong heritage and we need to find the similarities across the markets. So what would be a sharpened positioning, for instance, in Hershey franchise, that can effectively be translated and be ownable? So that's the first one. The second one we were saying is, when you dance, there are 2 people dancing, and there are kind of rules in this moment of dancing. If you dance tango, there are rules, and if you dance in rock, there are other rules. So in that sense, in the examples of P&G and Unilever, this is very clear what local people or global people do. So what would be the roles of people in the countries and people in Hershey in building advertising? So we are learning together. So what would be a better definition of this role for each people to be more effective in this relationship?
It's funny, I forgot to mention that as I was discussing Organize, but the #1 point that came back, if you interview CMOs and say, what is the thing that you wish you'd done day one? the top of the list is set down very clear roles and responsibilities. Of all the other things, that's the one. And the funny thing is, it's not in our genes. How many marketeers do you know that go, oh, let's make an operating model? We don't like it, but we need it. So it's very interesting that you raised that point. Is there any big other challenges that came on any of the challenge tables that haven't been mentioned? No, then we'll move on now to the characteristics of global brands. So what we asked you to do was to take a brand you truly respect or even fear, that's a competitor, and one of your own brands. And just do an audit to say, against these three things, universal truth, purposeful positioning, and experiential branding, total experience, how good are we doing, and how good is our competitor doing? So I'm very interested to hear your honest and frank feedback about yourself and your competitor. Which table would like to go first? No one. Yeah, this table over here. Yes, please. And Eric has a microphone. Could you just say who you are and what you do?
Hi, Mark McCormick, and I'm in U.S. pack-type marketing. Very different. And we've got a table here, and we've got U.S., we've got Japan, Korea, China, and Philippines. So a lot of discussion. We came back and agreed to Ferrero Rocher as the competitor. Exists in all the markets, and very strong competitor in all the markets in its own way. And then we compared it against Kisses. So from a universal truth, you know, Rocher was really about everyone liking, loving a gift, and their ability to provide that special product, both in terms of the product itself and the wrap. And comparing that to Kisses, where more the universal truth is everyone loving chocolate, and you being able to provide a special shape and wrap to provide that special, unique connection moment. So taking that, which is kind of close to positioning, but taking it a little further into positioning, again with Rocher, the special treat that you'll be proud to give, proud to receive. And then also what I noted here was they really have no difference in the product and the message in any market anywhere in the world. And so they've truly got that global positioning going. Whereas with Kisses, obviously we've got that unique piece and shape and wrap, which is global, and the messaging's global, but we actually have product differences, you know, from market to market. Even the chocolate flavor itself could be different from market to market, and then cookies and cream and other flavors that pop in. So in the total experience, where you sort of wrap it up, the Rocher, where they give you the wrap and the product and the pricing, which tends to be more premium, you know, the high end, and they're very consistent on that, making it truly that special gift. Whereas on the Kisses, you've got the special shape and the special wrap, and along with the product and pricing, it's more of a simple sharing message that goes with that at that price point. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of similarities, but again, the ability to be perfectly global and aligned is a little bit of an advantage to be feared, I guess.
Right. That's very, very insightful, and I think it'd be nice to contrast it now to another table's analysis. Can we have, there's a table over here. And as you talk through your answers, be a little subjective as well about whether you think something is a good thing or a bad thing.
Okay. So I'm David Forney. I'm Director of Global Consumer Communications, and we're a table of ugly Americans here. Our diversity comes in that we have legal, we have consumer relations, agency, innovation, digital, Moira, and me. So what we did was we sort of took, we looked at M&Ms and sort of took and compared and contrasted that to pieces. And what we said about the universal truth for M&Ms is that people want to share or people want to connect for fun times. So the purposeful positioning for M&Ms is that it brings people, especially youth, together for fun times. And the total experience is the shareability of M&Ms, the color and sort of the brightness of the colors and the excitement of the colors, and it's fun to eat, even to the point of the myths of the green being, I guess, Viagra, which should have been blue or something. And then if we look at Hershey on pieces, It's interesting because the universal truth and the purposeful positioning are exactly the same. So the universal truth for pieces is people want to connect for fun times. And the purposeful positioning is that it brings people together for fun times. The slight differences there, I would say pieces is a little bit broader and not just bringing youths together or younger people together for fun times. A lot of the experiences were the same, but there are a few minor differences. So it definitely has shareability. One thing that we have that M&M's doesn't have, M&M's has plain and peanut. And granted, they have all that other stuff that they've tried to do. Most of it failed. But we really have a diversity of flavor with Almond Joy and Special Dark and some of the upcoming flavors that are coming to market. There's diversity of flavor, and I said, our diversity of color, but I question, is that enough of a difference? We're sort of subtle in our colors, and it's fun to eat. The one big difference that we sort of discussed is that our pieces is kind of passive. When we look at M&M's as sort of being bright and fun and all that, pieces can be a little bit on the passive side, and granted it was positioned to go out to a broader audience, more adult, and I think we're moving away from that adultness. The one thing that's really scary is we sort of said that if Mars ever really got their stuff together, if they sort of flipped their spending level, so the things that make M&Ms really work well are My M&Ms, where you can personalize it, or you can personalize the color combination of M&Ms, and that becomes a sharing of yourself, and it's saying, here's who I am, and you can start to share that with others. They're spending very little money on that. Right now they're spending on the characters, and the characters are sort of an individual connection rather than a shareability connection across people. So if they ever really got their stuff together and sort of flipped their spending on how you can individually say with M&Ms, here's who I am, that's where it gets scary.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Let's take another table that looked at the what of the brands. Maybe a little bit more towards the back. Somebody that hoped that they could just slide down the chair and stay low. Who's courageous enough to volunteer? Let's try and get a very international perspective.
Very good, very good.
And please stand up and say who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Samarth. I'm from JWT India. And I would like to talk about Cadbury's Dairy Milk. Although we don't have Hershey's out there as a milk chocolate. But I'll tell you what Cadbury's Dairy Milk is doing. Basically, the universal truth is that happy moments are meant to be celebrated. And in India, whenever there's a happy moment, you generally have a sweet with the happy moment. And what Cadbury's has done is that it has taken that tradition and is present in every Indian happy moment. Over the last 5 years, they've been building that up. So in terms of total experience, we say Cadbury's Dairy Milk is present in every Indian occasion which demands a sweet, and therefore it's it's a complete 360 experience.
Very clear. Anything else?
So basically, they're very well entwined into the Indian culture, and makes it very difficult for Hershey's milk chocolate to really find an find an entry into that.
Yeah. Okay. Now, we talked about how important it is that the what is right, and a lot of work's been done on brand development in your company, and I think a lot of that's being rolled out right now. Hopefully, what this session did is it awakened a real sense of, but the how. What is the how? How are we going to do this? How are we going to behave? How are we going to work with each other? So I'm particularly interested also in some of the C discussion tables, and I'd like to hear one or two of those. Who would like to just summarize the discussion on their front? Right there in the back.
I'm Avril Singh. I work on a small startup business called Regen, muscle recovery beverage. As far as the most important driver, I think we were fairly unanimous is connect. The first time the Global Marketing Conference was held, it was a lot of international people coming into the United States and talking to the people on those businesses saying, what the hell are you guys doing? Very different kind of tenor because there was no communication. There was no connectivity, really. Year 2, it was, I feel uncomfortable around you, but I'm beginning to like you. And, and year 3 has been, hey, saw your brand plan posted on Planet Hershey. Quite a lot of flaws in there, but glad that we're sharing that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to happen with connectivity, and that's undoubtedly the most important driver. As far as learning and improving, I think what's been phenomenal, for North America at least, has been the discipline that we have brought into the process over the past few years. So brand architecture, something that was not part of the vocabulary when I started with the company in 2006, now we have something like that for Pelon Pelo Rico. That's very encouraging. I think even if it needs to be an intern project over the summer, someday I would like to see that for the Zero Bar. So, we need to do that. As far as what needs to be improved moving forward, the higher purpose, I think, we encapsulated that in a statement, delivering moments of Hershey happiness around the world every day. And that's powerful. What's even more powerful is the Milton Hershey school story that a lot of us feel very proud about in the United States. But when I spent about 1.5 years in Canada across the border, very quickly I realized that even that is not relevant, just maybe a few hundred miles from here. How can we send 2 million students to school across the world who come from disadvantaged backgrounds? How can we do that in the next decade? We don't have to look to the Hershey Trust to do that. We can make that happen. So something that really drives that higher purpose. I think we have barely scratched the surface with the 100th-year anniversary celebration last year and the whole Queen Latifah campaign. That needs to be a global phenomenon. So just a few thoughts that our team had.
Very nice. Well, you struck a nerve. Very good. Let's ask this table over here. Could you guys just summarize the key? Who's your spokesperson?
Hi, my name is Daniel Gonzalez. I work in the Global Brand Excellence and Equity team. I have a pretty diverse team here, Innovations, Mexico. We came up with the most relevant driver for us and why. We thought it was focus. Specifically because we think that sometimes we have too many initiatives going on at the same time, especially as we're growing and continue to expand globally. Sometimes need to find those 2 and 3 things that will drive the most business and results for us. So versus spreading thin on the different initiatives. In terms of what we do well and should be continued, we thought the Connect piece, we did a fantastic job. I mean, we have some of the best brands in the world. We have done, great things over the past years, and the results showed it. So definitely we need to keep some of what we're doing already, but also be open to, different practices and different things that other companies in other markets and other, countries are doing as well. In terms of what needs to be improved as we move forward, it's a pretty obvious one. I think organize, especially because we're getting into a new organizational structure. We need to really understand how to best work efficiently in a matrix organization, and especially being one organization with one voice, one vocabulary, and one common approach. So.
It's funny, I didn't mention it, but I do want to say it to you. 2 examples of bigger is better. Of course, we all know that's not true always. But as global brands, I'll give you 2. The first was Smirnoff. They had lots of discussions because their theme was music, and everyone was running concerts in New York. They had jazz concerts in San Francisco, different again, and in France and Germany and England, different things. And the budgets per country were peanuts. They rolled it up, and they partnered with U2. It's that simple. That's when they had the budget. Last week, I was talking to somebody at Facebook who was responsible for putting together the deals between Facebook and big branded companies. And I can't describe the details of it, but it's a huge deal where somebody we all know is going to launch a record, a CD, or actually it doesn't exist, only on Facebook. 7 million free downloads in the first 24 hours. And he was shopping it around, and he was just giving me the names and the lists of the companies where they could muster their power and say, yeah, we'll do that. Everywhere in the world, but you've got one negotiation person and the budget, or not. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he famously killed 250 innovation projects and focused on one. When Sylvia Lagnado took over Dove, she killed 350 innovation projects around the world, of which her estimate was that about 50 were trying to do exactly the same thing in a different place. And focused, I don't know exactly how many, I think it was 30. But bigger is better, not everywhere, but actually ring fencing an amount to say, only then will we create things that really will go ahead of everything else, is very often a big challenge, and it takes real work and guts and leadership to make happen at global level. Anybody else on the drivers' tables that had a big point that hasn't been mentioned? No. Well, then I'm not going to push this siesta slot any further than I dare. We asked you to be very patient, and we ran through a lot of factors. But if we leave you with one thing, it's not just a great what. We need to think about how we're going to do that. And I am honored to have been here, and I'm very, very proud to have been part of this conference. And I wish you all great strength and success as you move forward with your Global Growth Drive. Thank you for your time.
Mark. Alana. Mark, why don't you stay up there? So we have a little token of our appreciation for you to
Not so
share
little.
with your families. It's a 5-pound Hershey bar. We thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for your presentation. I think it was great. Thank you. Good stuff.
Mark, thank you. Thank you.
You know, I think I want to take it to the practical level. So we have in the U.S. literally the strongest brands in the country. But we said yesterday that good enough never is, right? I think we can get better. I think we can push farther. So I just want to, for those of you who are trying to drive in that area, I'd ask you to reach out to your IBI partners and Jeff Stern and his Excellence in Equity team to help drive some of that process. This is one of those Center of Excellence capabilities we have created. It is a resource to help you do what you need to do. So let's make sure we're taking advantage of that. And Avril, I think youth education as a global platform, there's something to that, and I appreciate that thought there. Thank you very much. Oh, we have a 30-minute break now, guys. Thank you.